Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a truly fascinating and often debated topic, company culture. We've all heard the buzz, about organizations striving for peak performance, often through these highly structured, almost legendary internal systems. But this raises a crucial question, doesn't it? How far is too far in this quest for efficiency and, well, truth? Our mission for this deep dive is to really dissect a specific approach to company culture, one that champions an idea meritocracy. Through intense feedback, constant scrutiny, even algorithmic scoring, we're going to challenge whether such a system, despite its noble goals, can truly foster creativity and psychological safety, or if it risks morphing into something, well, far less desirable. A kind of high-tech groupthink, potentially ruled by the very algorithms it deploys. We'll be pulling insights from a stack of incredible sources to guide us. Okay, let's unpack this.
Indeed. And the promise of an idea meritocracy, it's undeniably appealing, almost utopian, isn't it? I mean, who wouldn't want a system where the absolute best ideas consistently rise to the top, unhindered by ego or hierarchy? It sounds like the perfect engine for progress. But as we dive deep into the source material today, we'll see that the implementation of such a system can have profound and sometimes, well, deeply unexpected implications. Implications for human behavior, for the bedrock of trust within an organization, and ultimately for its long-term health and adaptability. We're going to look beyond the stated, often admirable intentions to understand what truly happens in practice, examining the why behind the concerns that emerge when, human complexity meets algorithmic rigidity.
That's a critical distinction to make right from the start, the intention versus the reality. So let's begin by appreciating the grand vision, the ideal, the very foundations of what an idea meritocracy aims to achieve. Companies often set out with this ambition to build what Seven Powers describes as power in your business. And this isn't just about fleeting success. It's about a sustainable, defensible advantage that comes, as they say, on the heels of invention, be it in products, processes, brands, or business models. At its core, it's this relentless drive for operational excellence, right? It's that desire to optimize every single process, to make everything as efficient and effective as humanly or perhaps even algorithmically possible.
Absolutely. And the pursuit of operational excellence is not just a legitimate business goal. It's often, frankly, an existential one. In today's competitive landscape, organizations must strive for peak performance. The core belief underpinning these highly managed systems, as we learned from HBR's 10 must-reads on managing yourself, is that knowledge is most valuable when understood and applied. It's not enough to simply have smart people or great ideas. You need a mechanism, a system to rigorously test those ideas, to push them through a kind of gauntlet of scrutiny, ensuring that only the most robust, data-driven, and thoroughly vetted solutions are ultimately pursued. The theoretical payoff is immense. Superior results, achieved by systematically removing arbitrary decision-making, minimizing human error, and ensuring a logical, almost scientific progression of ideas and actions. It's an attempt, really, to turn the subjective messiness of human decision-making into an objective, optimized process.
Right. And if you can remove those arbitrary human elements, if you can truly elevate the quality of ideas above everything else, then you're aiming for a kind of pure meritocracy where the best ideas win, regardless of who proposes them. It's about leveraging collective intelligence in its purest form, cutting through personal biases, office politics, or even, established hierarchies. It's a compelling vision, isn't it? A place where the quality of the idea is the only currency that truly matters.
It is, and this ideal aligns beautifully with Peter Drucker's insights in The Essential Drucker. He wisely points out that the understanding that underlies the right decision grows out of the clash and conflict of divergent opinions and out of the serious consideration of competing alternatives. The intention here is to actively combat that common human trap of simply looking for the facts that fit the conclusion they have already reached. We all do it. In a truly effective idea meritocracy, every idea is meant to be subjected to a kind of intellectual trial by fire, a crucible of rigorous debate and data analysis, ensuring that only the strongest, most defensible ideas survive and are implemented. The aspiration is to move beyond mere consensus or compromise towards decisions that are genuinely informed by truth, challenging assumptions, and leading to truly innovative and effective solutions by forcing a deeper examination of all possibilities, not just the comfortable ones. You can see the powerful appeal of creating such a rational, objective environment.
Okay, that ideal, that pursuit of pure, unvarnished truth and operational excellence, it sounds almost irresistible on paper. It promises a place where the best ideas are nurtured and rise to the top. But let's shift our focus now to where the rubber meets the road, because this is where things can get, well, a little complicated and perhaps surprisingly counterproductive. One of the most talked about aspects of these intense cultures, like Bridgewater's for example, is the emphasis on constant criticism. The idea, as often articulated, is to quickly identify and correct errors, ensuring continuous improvement, preventing small issues from becoming the big problems. But I have to ask, what does this relentless focus on correction, this pervasive environment of critique, actually do to the people within the system? How does it shape their day-to-day experience?
This is precisely where the ideal often collides head-on with the realities of human psychology. It really does. While challenging directly can indeed be kind and beneficial for growth, think about radical candor, that idea of caring personally and challenging directly. The manner and the pervasiveness of that criticism are absolutely crucial determinants of its impact. You know, How to Win Friends and Influence People offers a timeless warning here, noting that calling attention to one's mistakes indirectly works wonders with sensitive people who may resent bitterly any direct criticism. If criticism becomes the default mode of interaction, the relentless norm, or feels like a constant barrage with little balance, it can trigger what's known as reactance, a concept deeply explored in Influence, New, and Expanded. And reactance isn't just a minor annoyance, it's a powerful negative emotional response to perceived threats to one's freedom or autonomy. Instead of fostering genuine change, it often leads to deep-seated resentment, defensiveness, and a breakdown in trust. People might comply on the surface, right? They might go through the motions, but internally they're pushing back, creating a counterproductive dynamic that actively undermines the very unity and improvement the system seeks to build. The ultimate irony here is that a system designed for truth and openness can inadvertently breed a culture of guardedness and resistance. And this point is beautifully illuminated by Stephen Covey's metaphor of the emotional bank account in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Hmm.
Think of every interaction we have with colleagues, with leaders, even with the organizational system itself as either a deposit or a withdrawal from this account. Acts of courtesy, kindness, keeping commitment, showing genuine interest, these are deposits that build trust. Crucial deposits. But constant, unmitigated criticism, especially if it's perceived as, disrespect, cutting you off, overreacting, ignoring you, becoming arbitrary, betraying your trust, threatening you, or playing little tin god in your life. Those are massive trust-eroding withdrawals. When this emotional bank account becomes overdrawn, the trust level towards the person giving the criticism, or indeed the system itself, becomes critically lower. The relationship then devolves into what Covey calls tension city, memo heaven, where people are primarily focused on protecting my backside, politicking, rather than truly collaborating, innovating, or taking risks. This environment actively erodes the psychological safety that is absolutely needed for people to be truly open, vulnerable, and willing to put forth unpolished ideas or admit mistakes. Without that safety, the quality of feedback diminishes rapidly, and people become less receptive to it, even if it's well-intended. It's a self-defeating spiral.
Right. So even if the intent behind this constant critique is undeniably good, to refine, to improve, to achieve excellence, the delivery and critically the sheer frequency can create the exact opposite effect of what's desired. Instead of fostering growth, it can cultivate a deep-seated culture of fear and defensiveness. And if that's the impact of relentless verbal criticism, I have to wonder what happens when we escalate this to the digital realm. What are the implications when this intense feedback is combined with something as pervasive as, say, videotaped meetings, and even more starkly, algorithmic believability scores? This is where the human element truly meets the machine.
This moves us into a territory that raises some really profound questions about the nature of work, privacy, and authenticity. Consider the concept of surveillance capitalism, as vividly explored in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which describes the external data collection and monitoring by tech giants for profit. When similar high levels of monitoring, like those videotape meetings you mentioned, and the meticulous tracking of every interaction are applied internally within an organization, it naturally evokes strong concerns about privacy, individual autonomy, and, frankly, control. It fundamentally shifts the dynamic within the workplace, from being guided by shared principles and purpose to being constantly watched and analyzed. The question then becomes, are we fostering a culture of trust and shared responsibility, or are we inadvertently creating an environment of internal surveillance, where employees feel their every move, every word, every gesture is scrutinized and recorded for judgment, not just by a human, but by an impartial, ever-present algorithm? And this pervasive monitoring has profound, often subtle impacts on communication and authenticity. The discipline of teams warns us that groupware technology endangers mutual accountability. Why? Because asynchronous participation and disembodied communication combine to threaten the shared understanding and emotional commitment. When every interaction, every word, every contribution is recorded and then potentially fed into a system that assigns a believability score like they do at Bridgewater, it can inadvertently encourage a performance rather than genuine collaboration. People might become less likely to voice unpolished thoughts, to float half-formed ideas that are still being developed.
Yeah. Or challenge the status quo.
Exactly. Or offer unpopular opinions for fear of how they might be judged by the system, by their superiors, or how it might negatively affect their score. True teamwork, the source suggests, often requires the rich nuances of in-person, unrecorded interaction, especially when teams get stuck and need to navigate complex challenges with real-time, authentic dialogue where ideas can be explored freely without immediate consequence. The danger is that we gain data, but lose genuine human connection and the spontaneity crucial for true problem solving. Furthermore, this kind of environment directly impacts how individuals interact with their leadership. In a culture where every interaction is scored and scrutinized, how do you effectively manage your boss, as the HBR classic discusses? If a boss or the algorithmic system itself, through its metrics, signals even implicitly that they want to hear only good news, subordinates will naturally adapt. It's human nature. They might find indirect, circuitous ways to communicate problems, or even more dangerously, they might simply swallow their anger and hold back what they know to be a poor decision. This creates a perilous feedback vacuum, where necessary critiques or warnings about potential issues are suppressed, leaving leaders operating with incomplete, filtered, or overtly positive information.
Which could lead to disaster down the line.
Precisely. The consequence, potentially bigger, unforeseen problems, because the very mechanisms designed for transparency have ironically fostered a new kind of opacity.
Stark paradox, isn't it? The very tools designed for transparency and objective measurement could, in practice, foster a different kind of opacity. One where people perform for the algorithm, for their score, rather than genuinely engaging, collaborating, or speaking their minds. It's a performance for the system, not a genuine exchange of ideas.
Precisely. And this also connects powerfully to what Influence New and Expanded calls the focusing illusion. This psychological phenomenon suggests that what gains our attention gains in importance. Makes sense, right? So if believability scores are highly visible, frequently discussed, directly tied to career progression, or even, in some systems, a prerequisite for having your ideas taken seriously, people will naturally, almost inevitably, focus disproportionately on activities that directly improve those scores. And this can happen at the expense of other important but perhaps unmeasured or unquantifiable aspects of their work or relationships, like mentoring or collaboration or long-term thinking. The organization risks cultivating a narrow, metric-driven approach where the system effectively trains people to prioritize the measurable, even if it's not always the most valuable or strategically important contribution to the company's overall health and mission. It can create a culture where the shadow of a metric eclipses the substance of true impact.
That makes a lot of sense. If you're constantly being measured on a specific quantifiable thing, your focus will naturally narrow. Okay. But now let's explore how this kind of intense, algorithmic culture might impact something absolutely critical for any business hoping to thrive in a dynamic world: innovation and originality. An idea meritocracy should, by definition, welcome groundbreaking, even radical ideas. But how does a system built on constant criticism and algorithmic scores handle the inherently messy, unpredictable, and often uncomfortable process of true innovation? This doesn't sound like a tidy, quantifiable process at all.
It's a fundamental tension, and it strikes at the heart of what true originality requires. It really does. Originals, how nonconformists move the world, highlights that originality begins by questioning defaults and balancing risk portfolios. It further emphasizes that leaders must actively create cultures of originality. A highly structured, algorithmic system, by its very nature and design, might inadvertently discourage this vital questioning of defaults. Why? Well, if ideas are subjected to immediate, constant criticism and scored for believability based on established parameters,
Right.
an idea that is truly novel, truly disruptive, will, by definition, likely seem unbelievable or wrong at first glance.
Right, because it doesn't fit the existing pattern.
Exactly. Think of revolutionary ideas throughout history. They rarely started with high believability scores among the established powers. The inherent risk of being perceived as incorrect, illogical, or having a low believability score could easily outweigh the incentive to put forth genuinely original, untested, and potentially uncomfortable ideas. This leads to a preference for incremental improvements rather than radical breakthroughs. Safety over boldness. Innovation, by its very nature, thrives in a space where experimentation and even failure are seen as learning opportunities, not as public marks against your record.
Which is exactly what an algorithmic scoring system might inadvertently create.
Precisely. It can instill a fear of being wrong that kills the creative spark. And this point is powerfully reinforced by Seth Godin in Purple Cow. He explicitly states, there is no foolproof way to create a purple cow every time. He asks, is there a secret formula that you can use to increase creativity at the same time you stay firmly grounded in reality? His answer, of course not, there is no plan. This directly challenges the premise that an algorithmic system, no matter how sophisticated, can reliably engineer breakthrough innovation. Remarkable ideas, the purple cows that make a product or service stand out from the crowd by their very definition, often defy predictable patterns, challenge established metrics, and resist conventional wisdom. They emerge from intuition, from experimentation, from a willingness to be radically different and perhaps even illogical at first glance. These are qualities that are incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to quantify or score algorithmically in their nascent stages. Expecting an algorithm to predict or even foster true originality is like expecting a meticulously designed spreadsheet to compose a groundbreaking symphony. It's optimizing for a different kind of output entirely.
That's a powerful analogy. It really highlights the limits of a purely rational, measurable approach. And speaking of how individuals perceive their capabilities, when people are constantly scored, evaluated, and potentially judged on their believability, does it make them feel like they're being judged on their inherent fixed abilities as static characteristic? Or does it encourage them to feel they have the potential to grow and evolve, to develop new skills and perspectives? This takes us squarely into the realm of mindsets, right?
Exactly. This is a critical psychological distinction drawn in Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck. It's crucial. She points out that a fixed mindset can emerge if individuals feel their abilities, their intelligence, or their competence are being constantly judged as static, inherent traits. In this fixed mindset, people believe their talents are simply given, leading them to avoid challenges, give up easily when faced with obstacles, and feel threatened by the success of others because it implicitly questions their own fixed abilities. Instead, fostering a growth mindset is absolutely crucial for learning and innovation, and that requires praising the process, their hard work, strategies, focus, perseverance, rather than just the innate outcome or a fixed score. An algorithmic believability score, if not incredibly carefully designed, communicated, and integrated into a broader culture of learning, might inadvertently cultivate a fixed mindset. If your score reflects your inherent believability or perceived competence, individuals might understandably fear failure more than they embrace learning from mistakes. This leads to defensive behaviors, self-preservation, and a profound reluctance to try new, potentially risky approaches.
Which is precisely the opposite of what's needed for genuine progress and learning, and certainly for originality.
Absolutely. The system could be inadvertently training people to avoid anything that might lower their score, rather than encouraging the bold experimentation that leads to breakthroughs.
And then you have something like the lean startup, which defines its core premise as creating new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty. This sounds like the absolute antithesis of an algorithmic approach. Isn't the whole point of an algorithmic system, especially one focused on operational excellence, to reduce uncertainty, to bring order and predictability to chaos? This seems like a direct, fundamental conflict between the goals of innovation and the mechanisms of a highly controlled, algorithmically driven culture.
It absolutely is a fundamental tension, and one that organizations must grapple with directly. It's a core challenge. While algorithms thrive on data, on identifying patterns, and on bringing predictability to complex systems, true innovation, especially disruptive innovation, often emerges from environments of deep uncertainty, from hypothesis testing that might fail multiple times, and from a willingness to pivot rapidly when initial assumptions are proven wrong. That's the lean methodology. A system that relentlessly optimizes for known metrics, for existing patterns, or for minimizing deviation from established norms might struggle immensely to identify, let alone nurture, genuinely disruptive ideas. Ideas that just don't fit historical data or established success criteria.
Because they look like outliers or errors initially.
Exactly. Think about a company like Intuit, which the lean startup describes as measuring innovation by the number of customers using products that didn't exist 3 years ago, and the percentage of revenue coming from offerings that did not exist 3 years ago. Quote, these metrics inherently demand embracing the genuinely new and uncertain, not just incrementally better versions of what already exists. A purely algorithmic system designed to reduce variance and optimize for existing conditions might simply be blind to the weak signals of truly novel, uncertain, but potentially transformative ideas. It's a bit like trying to navigate uncharted waters with a map that only shows known ports you'll never discover new land.
Okay, so an algorithmic meritocracy. while aiming for objective truth, might inadvertently create a very narrow definition of what truth or excellence actually looks like, optimizing for the known rather than embracing the unknown. This leads us to the unsettling specter of high-tech groupthink and the unavoidable influence of a founder's biases, even within a supposedly objective system. Because even with all the sophisticated algorithms in the world, no system operates in a vacuum, completely devoid of human influence. How much does the founder's initial vision or powerful personality continue to shape or even dominate such a culture? Perhaps subtly embedding their preferences into the very algorithms that run the show.
The founder's influence is incredibly potent, often indelible, and frequently inescapable. It really is. Blitzscaling reminds us that founders and CEOs are cultural role models. If they don't exemplify the culture, it will inevitably weaken. This implies that the founder's beliefs, their preferences, their unique way of seeing the world, even their quirks become deeply ingrained in the organizational DNA. How will you measure your life? Further describes culture as a way of working together toward common goals that have been followed so frequently and so successfully that people don't even think about trying to do things another way. When this way of working is heavily influenced by a singular, powerful vision like Ray Dalio's at Bridgewater with his principles, even if filtered through layers of algorithms and data, it can become a subtle yet pervasive form of institutionalized bias. The algorithms themselves, which are ultimately designed and programmed by humans, often reflecting the founder's core principles, can become extensions of that initial bias.
Rather than truly objective, impartial arbiters of truth.
Precisely. We can see this vividly in historical examples. Take Steve Jobs and Apple, as meticulously detailed in his biography. Jobs always wanted Apple to create its own unified utopia, a magical walled garden, where everything worked seamlessly together and under Apple's control. This vision was so powerful, so deeply embedded in his being, that it could dominate decisions, even when challenged by his incredibly talented team. We saw this, for instance, when they pushed back on his initial reluctance to allow iPods to work with Windows machines.
Which seems obvious now, but went against his core philosophy.
Exactly. It was a practical concession that went against his walled garden ideal, but was crucial for market penetration. While his teams might push for practical concessions, the initial bias and the deeply held singular vision were incredibly strong. This illustrates how even an organization striving for an idea meritocracy can be profoundly shaped by a founder's powerful, singular perspective. In such a system, algorithms would likely be tuned to optimize his vision of seamless integration or user control, potentially at the expense of other, equally valid but less aligned ideas.
Ideas that might promote openness or broader compatibility, for example.
Right. The very definition of best becomes filtered through the founder's lens.
That's a great example of how a personal vision can profoundly shape even the most rigorous systems. So it leads us to an uncomfortable truth, maybe. If algorithms are ultimately designed by humans, can they truly ever be free of human bias? Or do they just become incredibly efficient at reinforcing the biases of their creators, potentially on a massive, almost inescapable scale?
This is one of the most critical questions facing any organization deploying complex algorithmic systems today. It's huge. The essential Drucker astutely points out that people inevitably start out with an opinion. To ask them to search for the facts first is even undesirable. Why? Because they will simply do what everyone is far too prone to do anyhow. Look for the facts that fit the conclusion they have already reached. Confirmation bias, essentially. So if algorithms are built upon a founder's deeply held principles or reflect the initial assumptions and worldview of their creators, they might be designed, consciously or unconsciously, to find and reward information that confirms those principles or that aligns with existing mental models. This can create a powerful, self-reinforcing feedback loop that actively discourages truly divergent thinking.
Because the system tells you you're right.
Exactly. The consequence is a kind of high-tech groupthink, where deviations from the established truth, the founder's truth, as embedded in the algorithm, are algorithmically penalized or simply deemed unbelievable. The system, rather than fostering a diversity of new ideas, essentially becomes an echo chamber for the dominant perspective, amplified and enforced by code. This phenomenon is also vividly highlighted in The Big Short. Remember that. It revealed that complex financial models often underestimated the likelihood of extreme moves in prices, and they tended to presuppose that the distant future would look more like the present than it usually did. Algorithms, by their very nature, extrapolate from past data and existing patterns. They look backward. This means they could be inherently blind to unprecedented changes, what are often called black swan events, or truly novel opportunities that don't fit historical patterns. In a culture driven by such algorithms, genuinely disruptive ideas, which by definition look nothing like the past, might be overlooked or actively suppressed.
Because the system simply cannot recognize their believability or potential based on its historical programming.
Precisely. It's like navigating but looking only in the rearview mirror. You'll inevitably miss the sharp turn coming ahead.
So, in essence, are we potentially trading good judgment, human discretion, and that vital human capacity for adaptability, for a rigid adherence to rules and algorithms that might contain inherent biases and significant blind spots, especially when facing unprecedented change?
That's precisely the danger, and it's one that the four highlights as a critical challenge, particularly for large established companies. It notes, the processes put in place to scale begin slowing the firm down, as managers begin believing that adhering to the guidelines is more important than making good decisions. This is a direct, often unintended consequence of a system that prioritizes algorithmic compliance and quantifiable metrics over human discretion and nuanced judgment. When the algorithms embed founder biases or are simply too rigid to account for unforeseen circumstances or the subtle shifts in reality, they can lead to an environment where people follow the letter of the law as interpreted by the algorithm, even if it goes directly against what good, experienced human judgment would suggest. This stifles agility, can create unnecessary bureaucracy, and ultimately hinders effective decision-making in complex, dynamic environments where intuition and adaptability are paramount. The ultimate irony, again, is that a system designed for truth can become a system that is fundamentally blind to new truths emerging outside its predefined parameters.
This brings us to a crucial inflection point in our discussion. If a rigid algorithmic approach, despite its, noble intentions, has these potential downsides, stifling creativity, eroding trust, embedding biases,
Yeah.
what do the experts say about truly effective leadership? What are the essential human elements that we might be losing sight of, or perhaps actively suppressing in the pursuit of algorithmic perfection?
That's really the heart of the matter, isn't it? What makes leadership truly effective? Leadership That Gets Results, by Daniel Goleman, emphasizes a profoundly different approach. He argues that the more styles a leader exhibits, the better, specifically mentioning authoritative, democratic, affiliative, and coaching styles. Adaptability is key. Effective leaders, Goleman notes, are exquisitely sensitive to the impact they're having on others and seamlessly adjust their style to get the best results. This directly contrasts with a one-size-fits-all algorithmic approach that might demand a singular, universal way of interacting or performing.
Or that assigns a cold, quantitative believability to every interaction.
Right. Human leadership thrives on nuance, empathy, and adaptability. Recognizing that different people and vastly different situations require unique approaches to motivate, guide, and develop them effectively. An algorithm, however sophisticated, cannot genuinely read the room, understand an individual's emotional state, or tailor its approach with the sensitivity and wisdom a human leader can. It fundamentally lacks the emotional intelligence to truly connect and inspire. And building on that, Peter Drucker, in Managing Oneself, provides a profound insight into individual performance. He says, how one performs is unique. It is a matter of personality. A person's way of performing can be slightly modified, but it is unlikely to be completely changed. People are different. This is a critical understanding that an algorithmic system might overlook or actively suppress. Effective human leaders understand and strive to leverage these individual strengths, these unique working styles and personalities, rather than expecting strict conformity to a single, algorithmically defined ideal. Forcing everyone into a rigid algorithmic mold risks alienating talented individuals whose unique contributions might not fit the predefined criteria.
So you end up stifling valuable potential simply because it doesn't conform to the system's narrow definition of effective or believable.
Exactly. A truly great leader nurtures individual genius, not just compliance to a preset standard.
That makes perfect sense. If you demand a single uniform way of operating, you're missing out on the rich diversity of human talent.
Absolutely. But beyond just acknowledging individual differences, how do you get people truly invested, truly committed? If everything is so meticulously controlled and measured by a system, where does that profound sense of ownership and personal stake really come from in an environment like that? That's precisely where the human element of ownership, liberty, and purpose becomes absolutely vital, and where algorithms, frankly, fall short. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin emphasizes leading down the chain of command and giving greater ownership of plans to the troops. So they deeply understand the why behind their missions, not just the what. The purpose matters. This empowerment, this sense of being entrusted with the mission, creates profound commitment and initiative that is incredibly difficult for any algorithm to generate. People become invested, not just compliant, when they feel a personal stake, when they understand the purpose, and when they are truly empowered to find solutions and navigate challenges themselves. An algorithm can only process, can only evaluate based on predefined rules. It cannot inspire this kind of profound dedication or foster the belief that one's efforts truly matter in a larger context. We also see a compelling real-world example of this principle in Liar's Poker. Michael Lewis describes a highly profitable unit at Salomon Brothers, where its members were left with room to think for themselves and where leadership apparently valued his liberty. This autonomy, this freedom to operate without constant micromanagement or the shadow of algorithmic scoring, allowed for a burst of creativity, ingenuity, and effective problem-solving that rigid adherence to rules might have stifled. It strongly suggests that sometimes the best, most innovative performance comes not from tighter controls and more pervasive measurement,
but from strategically loosening them.
Exactly. Loosening them to allow human intelligence, initiative, and the entrepreneurial spirit to truly flourish. The human mind needs space to breathe, to experiment, and yes, to be a little messy sometimes to produce truly remarkable results.
Okay, so instead of employees just being passive recipients, constantly evaluated by a score, can they actively contribute to shaping their own evaluation and growth? Can the feedback loop be transformed into something more empowering, more collaborative, less imposing?
Absolutely, and this represents a fundamental shift in perspective, a very important one. Blue Ocean Leadership advocates for a paradigm where people are engaged in defining what leaders should do, with to-be profiles are generated with the employee's own input. It's co-creation. This process isn't just about superficial engagement. It fosters a deep confidence in the changes made and far deeper engagement overall, because employees have greater ownership of what their leaders are doing and how they are being developed. It shifts the dynamic from being a passive recipient of top-down feedback, whether human or algorithmic,
to an active, respected participant in one's own development and, crucially, in the organization's strategic direction.
Yes, that's a profound distinction from a top-down algorithmic imposition. Similarly, radical candor suggests that the goal is to move towards radical candor by increasing the quantity and quality of guidance, which inherently requires nuanced human interaction, empathy, and the ability to build trust. These are conversations, not merely data inputs or automated critiques. It's about cultivating relationships where feedback is seen as a gift, intended to help, not just a judgment from the system.
It's fascinating to consider that these core human principles aren't new discoveries at all. Even centuries ago, Benjamin Franklin's father gave him advice that, well, it rings profoundly true today, despite all our technological advancements and the advent of algorithms.
Indeed. It's quite remarkable. In the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, his father advised him, upon starting a new endeavor, to behave respectfully to the people there, endeavor to obtain the general esteem, and avoid lampooning and libeling. This timeless wisdom highlights fundamental human needs, the need for respect, for social esteem, and the profound detrimental effect of public criticism or humiliation. In a culture of constant, often public criticism and relentless algorithmic scoring, this advice offers a stark contrast, doesn't it? It underscores that reputation, trust, and mutual respect are built through careful, empathetic human interaction and discretion, not through cold, hard data points or public displays of believability scores. Lampooning and libeling, or their modern equivalents in excessively harsh or public digital feedback, can destroy relationships, erode morale, and dismantle psychological safety in ways that no algorithm can truly mend or even adequately account for. Franklin's father understood something fundamental. Human relationships, not just objective truth in isolation, are the bedrock of collective success.
Okay, this all brings us to the highest stakes imaginable for any organization: its long-term viability and survival. Is this kind of intense algorithmic culture truly sustainable in the long run, especially in a world that is constantly changing and evolving with, frankly, dizzying speed? What happens when the very environment the algorithm was optimized for fundamentally shifts?
This is perhaps the most critical question for any organization adopting such a rigidly structured system. It's the ultimate test. The 4 offers a stark reminder. Business mimics biology, and thus far, the mortality rate is 100%. Sobering thought. No market is valuable forever, and companies have to keep searching for the next market in which to blitzscale, as stated in blitzscaling. Constant evolution is required. A rigid algorithmic system, optimized for existing conditions, for known variables, and for established metrics, might struggle immensely to adapt to unforeseen changes, to genuinely disruptive technology as explored in The Innovator's Dilemma, or to fundamental shifts in market dynamics. Such a system is built for efficiency in a known environment, not necessarily for agility and reinvention in an unknown future.
It can create brittleness, maybe.
Exactly. It can inadvertently foster a dangerous complacency by reinforcing existing truths and patterns, making it incredibly difficult for the organization to recognize when the environment itself has fundamentally changed, when it demands a radical shift in strategy or even core identity. The very mechanisms designed for survival in one context can become anchors weighing it down in another.
And building on that point, how well do these intensely managed systems, with their strong focus on internal metrics and controlled feedback loops, how well do they adapt when the world outside their walls changes? Are they truly built to receive and effectively process those crucial, often subtle, external signals?
That's a profound point, and "a country is not a company" draws a critical distinction here that sheds considerable light on this challenge. It explains that in the open system world of business, feedbacks are often weak and almost always uncertain. The outside world is messy. Trying to manage a complex business, which is inherently an open system constantly interacting with its environment, trying to manage it like a closed system with rigid, certain algorithmic feedbacks might lead to missing crucial, uncertain signals from the dynamic external environment.
Because those signals don't fit the internal model.
Precisely. The real world of business is full of ambiguity, weak signals, emerging trends, and unquantifiable human elements like shifting customer desires or competitor intentions. An over-reliance on internal, quantifiable, and predictable algorithmic feedbacks can create a dangerous internal echo chamber, causing a company to be slow or even fundamentally blind to critical shifts in customer needs, competitive landscapes, or emerging technologies outside its carefully constructed, algorithmically managed walls. True adaptability requires a system that is not only robust internally, but exquisitely sensitive and porous to the external world, embracing its inherent uncertainty rather than trying to engineer it away with algorithms. Hashtag outro.
So, after exploring all of this, what does it all mean for the quest for the ultimate idea, meritocracy, and for companies striving for that peak performance? We've explored how seemingly logical systems designed for efficiency, for clarity, and for unvarnished truth, can inadvertently stifle the very creativity they aim to nurture, erode the essential trust between people, and even breed a new, high-tech form of groupthink, driven, ironically, by the very algorithms meant to eliminate bias.
The journey through our sources today reveals a profound and perhaps uncomfortable challenge. How do we harness the immense power of data, of structure, and of rigorous analysis without sacrificing the invaluable yet often unquantifiable human elements? Those elements are things like psychological safety, genuine trust, spontaneous collaboration, and that unpredictable spark of human originality and intuition. The balance between rigorous algorithmic analysis and the messy, uncertain, yet often transformative spark of human connection and vulnerability. That balance remains absolutely crucial for an organization's long-term health, its innovation, and ultimately its survival in a changing world.
And for you, our listener, this deep dive hopefully invites a critical look at any system, whether in your workplace or elsewhere, that promises ultimate efficiency or perfect truth through complete control and quantification. How much human messiness, the kind that algorithms struggle to quantify, the kind that might generate a low believability score in its nascent stages. How much of that is truly essential for a thriving, innovative culture to exist? And what if the relentless quest for a perfectly rational, algorithmic idea meritocracy, like the one attempted at Bridgewater, inadvertently leads us down a path where the only best ideas recognized are those that the algorithm can recognize, leaving truly groundbreaking but initially unquantifiable insights by the wayside? Something to chew on for sure as you navigate your own professional world.